Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, August 16th, 2023 meeting of the Planning Commission. I'd also like to acknowledge that today is the 75th anniversary of the City of Falls Church becoming a city. So happy anniversary, everyone. As we observe this, there'll be a year-long observation of events recognizing our becoming a city. Mr. Stoddard and myself attended a flag-raising ceremony today out in front of the community center, so that officially launched the year-long observance. So with that, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Mr. Trainey, would you like to call the roll?
Mr. Krasner.
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens.
Here.
Mr. Puentes.
Here.
Ms. Coma.
Here.
All right, absent are Commissioners Hyra and Commissioner Friedlander. But we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Before we adopt the agenda, I'm going to announce we're going to make one change, and that is before item 7, which is our work session on T-zones. We're going to go into closed session. I'm going to estimate for roughly 20 minutes. Everybody who's here can stay here. We'll go to another room, and like I say, we'll be back in roughly a 20 to 30 minute time frame. So I just wanted to alert everybody to that change. And with that change, would someone like to make a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move we adopt the agenda for the Wednesday, August 16th meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed? Seeing none, the agenda is adopted. We don't have a speaker this evening, so our next item is receipt of petitions. We will have one public hearing tonight on the Fowler Street Lot line adjustment, but we won't have a public hearing on the T-zone discussion that we have later. That's a work session item for commission members. But at this time, anybody who would like to address the commission is welcome to do so. Mr. Trainer, do we have anybody who would like to speak?
We do, all on T-zones. The first is Jimmy Jung.
If you could state your name and address, please.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Jimmy Chung. Okay, well, he's recording. So I brought pictures, and the first picture, of course, if you should have them in front of you, is the familiar black and white and purple all over picture that Paul and Jack created. And as we all know, the bulk of the T-zone, I'm going to stop for a minute and make sure you guys have what I'm referencing. This? Yeah, that's the one. Sorry, I should have brought up one and waved it around. You want to pass it for a restart? So anyway, the bulk of the T-zone properties are up on Park in Washington. I don't want to be dismissive about the 4 southern properties at the bottom. You can see I took a little Google tour and showed what's in there. But the folks on West George Mason, the folks on Greenway Boulevard, the folks behind La Tangera, they actually do deserve the same sort of transitional neighborhood that they were promised. But I am going to focus on the ones in Park in Washington. Halfway down the park, if you turn the page, you'll see that there are 4 lots that we're primarily talking about. Now, one of these already has townhouses. One of these has actually already stood in front of you and started the development process with this commission. One of these has been coordinating with the neighborhood in a way that, quite frankly, rivals anything we've seen from the city. And his vision has garnered a ton of enthusiasm, but the real concern right now is that this proposal actually puts what everyone's so enthusiastic about at risk. But if we go back and take a look at that one that's already started developing, the folks at Park and Oak, that to me seems proof that we have processes in place to address reasonable, controlled development in our city. And this T-zone proposal seems to function so much primarily to take control out of the hands, out of the citizens, out of the commission's hands. But my real point here is that this whole effort is about a very critical, but a very small bit of acreage. On Park, I think we can say we're talking about maybe 1/3 of the area that was depicted. And on Washington, it's much the same. You turn the page, you'll see the T-zones depicted on Washington. But if you take out Kaiser, you take out the churches, you take out Sunrise, I'm assuming we're going to let the folks at Park Tower keep their parking. You discover that it is actually considerably less in play. My math gets fuzzy, but I think we can easily say that less than half is in play. I think we might also reasonably ask if we want or expect, or more importantly, actually want, the kind of form factor that this proposal allows in those narrow parcels that are currently the endocrinology group, or behind the State Theater, or at Maple and Great Falls. And of course, there are the 4 historic homes that you guys have repeatedly asked, well, what does this proposal do to mitigate the economic peril that those historic properties are now in because of this proposal? And the answers always come back, nothing. I would add to those 4 historic properties, something I just learned, that there are a number of historic properties along Columbia, one that abuts it, that's this fantastic frame house with a beautiful round turret, and it's going to suffer the same sort of risk because it's right next to it. But again, my real point here is that this whole effort is about a small, still critical, but very small amount of acreage. Added up, you got maybe 10, 12 acres. More conservative or more math would suggest even less than that, maybe 3 or 4 blocks on 2 streets, one of which we are turning into a great street. I find it hard to believe that our existing processes do not allow us to address good and bad ideas with the responsibility and control essential to developing and creating the beautiful city we want in Falls Church. This proposal has always been about forfeiting the voices of the citizens and the vague hope of some potential benefit a developer might give us back. I'm not saying we don't need housing. I very much want to see our teachers, our police, our bartenders living in our community, but that's not going to be accomplished on this teeny bit of real estate.
If you could wrap up your comments, please.
I'm going. If Falls Church wants to address housing, as it should, it needs to go big. This is small. This is meaningless, really. We've all acknowledged that this proposal will result in little, if any, affordable housing. No one is saying we don't need development. There are parking lots and old stock and a few blocks of our city that could be so much more. But what I am saying is this narrowly focused proposal is almost nonsensical. We have the ability to provide for reasonable development now without discounting the voices of the citizens, without discounting this commission. We're seeing it at Quinn. We're having these discussions about Oaken Park. Good ideas have a path forward, but this is a bad idea,
Thank you.
and I encourage you to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Fred Thompson, followed by Kathleen Thompson.
So I want to speak briefly about the notice process, because I'm assuming that there will have to be a new notice process with a new first reading. The last version of this had the council approving and reviewing through an SUP every development. This one has almost everything built by right. The last had substantial affordable housing. This will have 0 affordable housing. I'm assuming there will be a new notice process to people who own properties and people nearby properties. So I want to focus on what that process might look like. First of all, last time around, we only posted about a dozen properties out of the 50 or so, 55 or so properties that are under consideration here. There are a few less since we've taken the T2 properties out, but they're probably still close to 50 properties. Every one of those properties should be posted. Every one of those properties. And every one of those people who own those properties should get a letter. And that letter should not just talk about broad goals or send someone to a website where they have to make 5 clicks through to get to some indecipherable language about what's changing. It should actually tell them how this proposal is going to affect their home, their rights, what new rights they get, what old rights they lose, but some specific information about how this affects their property. That's been missing from this dialogue. And it also should tell them how the city is characterizing. There's been a table of attributes of properties that's been used in many of these briefings, but that people should be told what is their house considered a house? Is it considered an office? What are the rules of being associated and applied to it? Maybe it's not what the city thinks it is. In several cases, I can walk by and see something that says it's a private house and they've got a sign outside they're an office. So I think that actual information needs to be shared with them, and they need to be told what the consequences of that characterization is, how it affects their rights. So I want to say that I hope the process this time is more comprehensive. And then finally, I would say in that proclamation the mayor read and that you read today, it says engagement, engagement, engagement. I would suggest that you engage with the citizens who own that property. It doesn't have to be all of us, just the citizens who own that property. Tell them how their rights are changing and what it's going to, how it's going to affect them. Could be a small meeting of those who want to attend. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kathleen Thompson.
The other Thompson. Though my comments are going to be quite different. You have in your packet of background information a memo that Fred and I put together on August 2nd to the City Council. The second half of that memo covers legal concerns I have about the rezoning ordinance on T-zones, how it's drafted. These aren't concerns about the differing opinions of what the policy might be, but are concerns about how the policy decisions are accurately and thoroughly explained what will become city law. My concerns were ignored by the council on August 7th, so I followed up with you all with a memo on August 9th, which is also in your packet. I spent over 40 years of my career drafting, analyzing, and complying with very complex financial and consumer protection laws. I don't pretend to know anything about the city code. However, I can tell you that developers will love all the holes and ambiguities that exist right now in this current draft. The provisions come and go in the staff's draft without explanation. For the first time in the August 7th draft, without explanation or even being highlighted in gray, added back in was single-family dwellings to be allowed to be built by right, which was supposed to become a prohibited use when this whole thing first started. If that's going to happen, then there needs to be some specifications how 14 single-family homes can be built on the 1 acre of land required. Duplexes, too, are supposed to be, right from the beginning, excluded from T-zones. But starting with the July 10th draft, two-family dwellings will become permitted, but not duplexes. I don't know what the difference is between a two-family dwelling and a duplex. I hope you do. And the July 10th draft added an additional 10 feet in height for penthouse access to building roofs, but then that disappeared in the August 7th draft, so it was in and out. So there's a lot of things like that. I don't see detailed language establishing what the Planning Commission is even authorized to analyze for site reviews, something that we citizens rely on you so much to protect our interests. I just don't see where the criteria are. In fact, I provide examples about townhouses in an attachment to what I sent to the City Council, where I took the R-T zone stuff and reworked it into a T townhouse zone, so there'd be some criteria for you to evaluate for townhouses. But there's nothing in this draft with the criteria you all would use to evaluate site plans. For instance, for a multi-use commercial residential structure that could be built by right under this draft ordinance. A qualified lawyer needs to go through the draft language and rework many of its provisions, first of all, to make sure the language clearly conforms to whatever rezoning decisions the city leaders are making, and to provide the necessary details so that everyone, including planning commissioners, developers, and all of us, know what the actual rules and requirements are for the different types of structures that can be permitted in T-zones. This legal review clearly hasn't been done. And this cleanup of the draft ordinance language absolutely needs to be done before the Planning Commission holds a public hearing and makes its recommendations to the City Council. Otherwise, unresolved problems, if this language is adopted, with implementing language will impact the ability of you all to do your job on behalf of us. So this was just not getting into the details and disagreements. I beg you to have someone get a lawyer, and this is not a negative comment about the planning staff. This is, you need a lawyer. I mean, I've spent years reading very boring stuff, and I read this, and it just doesn't match up, and there's missing information. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Aaron Flynn, followed by Marita Hai.
Hi, Erin Flynn, 222 Little Falls Street. Thank you again for taking this up. I'm sure the work session will be a robust discussion, as it always is. But I just wanted to observe, I think the by right allowances are too permissive and disregard important aspects of the comprehensive plan at a development at all costs approach. And I'll focus primarily on the housing, environmental, and historic preservation aspects. As to housing, the newly added density isn't designed to achieve the diversity in housing stock like quads or townhouses that we've many times heard that we need, and it doesn't grant the flexibility to council or the city to respond to housing needs. We're not getting low and middle income housing despite the 75, 75, 75 COG goals. We're not getting workforce housing, which we may increasingly need given the ongoing vacancies that we have in city staff. We can't say that the housing will be accessible, and we're not creating homeownership opportunities or opportunities for first-time buyers. Rather, we're incentivizing small apartment buildings, and I'd say that if the goal is to have more two-bedroom apartments, the city can seek them through the SE process in the many multifamily developments. And the unfettered market isn't going to respond to our actual housing needs, and I would hope that more of this can go through the SUP process rather than less so that we don't lose those opportunities. On the environmental issues, I think it's imperative to stay below 20 units per acre by right to achieve a 15% tree canopy as default in these areas. It's necessary to achieve the environmental benefits like reduced ground and air temperature, help with stormwater, and counteract urban heat islands. We should be treating these spaces as important links between our larger developments that are devoid, frankly, of a lot of green space. So you should be thinking about Park Avenue as tree-lined between Founders Row and Broad and Washington, or between Broad and Washington and the new developments that may be up on East Jefferson eventually. Fairfax recently amended its street tree requirements in recognition that the so-called activity centers actually have much higher temperatures than elsewhere in the county. And I also think that by making development go through the SUP to achieve more density, that as opposed to allowing it by right, that we can achieve, more energy efficient buildings, get EV charging stations, and also potentially get more solar powered buildings. Finally, on historic properties, we've done nothing to protect the 4 historic properties that have come up repeatedly over the course of the last 9 months. I think Ms. Teets, back in the November listening session, was focused on these properties. The mayor's been focused on these properties, and frankly, nothing has been done for these properties, even though we have a historic preservation chapter of our comp plan. And I would urge and encourage the Planning Commission to consider moving to rezone the T lots that have the Historic Cultural Conservation District properties on them to T2, so that you can actually reduce the economic pressures, or at a very minimum that such lots are sort of regulated to go through the SUP process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Marita Hyde. Can you make sure your microphone's on?
Sorry. Maritza Hyde, 423 Park Avenue. I don't have any eloquent prepared remarks, but I do agree with everything that has been said by the previous speakers. I'm just a normal person, a housewife, a citizen of the city. I just wanted to express my grave disappointment in this process, this all-or-nothing approach that does not take into consideration the concerns of the citizens, despite many, many letters, suggestions. I came to this country at 4 years of age, escaping communism. I believe in our system of government. As a professional, I have served abroad representing the United States and democracy. Yet, here I am, living here and not seeing what I think should be the dialogue and the process that we tried to sell overseas. So my community is going to be negatively impacted by all of this. Most of us in my community have our primary, what we have is invested in our properties. And though You know, we live in this wonderful city. Your changes don't make sense. They don't take into consideration those of us who already live there. All of us who already live there want additional housing, want affordable housing, want all these wonderful things. But this approach that has been taken does not get us to that, and leads me as just a regular person to ask why. With so many other parcels of land in the city that are better suited for affordable housing, for dense development and all of that, why those aren't being focused upon, and why this small area of the city is being focused on. So, yes, I'm very disappointed. I have spoken individually to city council members to express my concern and that of my community, and I feel ignored, honestly, and betrayed. And I just think that there won't be any surprises come election time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers that I have registered.
Anybody online?
No.
Nope. Okay. I guess that completes our receipt of petitions from the public. So we can move on to our item number 6, which is the 1011 Fowler Street lot line adjustment. Mr. Stoddard, would you like to introduce the item?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So before you tonight, this is your first time hearing this. It's also before you as a public hearing item, and there is a request that you all take final action tonight. The application before you is what we refer to as a lot line adjustment between two existing lots in the city. They're conforming today. They'll be conforming after the lot line adjustment. You'll see in the title block, this is referred to as a subdivision application. That's how it's codified in our subdivision ordinance, that a lot line adjustment is considered a subdivision, even though there are no new lots being created. As I said, you are asked to review the application materials, hold a public hearing, and make a final action tonight. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission approve the application, and I'll turn it over for more information to our case planner, Mr. Jeff Hollern.
Hello, Planning Commissioners. I'm Jeff Holland with the planning staff. Tonight, Planning Commission is requested to hold a public hearing, discuss the application, and consider public comments, and take final action on the preliminary and final plat for a lot line adjustment at 1011 Fowler Street. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission approves the preliminary and final plat because the proposed lot line adjustment meets all requirements of the city's subdivision and zoning ordinances, and it's also generally consistent with the comprehensive plan. The lot line adjustment is between two existing lots, 2A and 2B, and is creating two new lots, 2A1 and 2B1. In an R1A district to adjust the size and dimensions of the two already buildable lots. The purpose of the application is to prepare for a future construction of a new single-family house, which can then better meet zoning setback requirements with the added square footage. As Paul had mentioned, this application follows under our Chapter 38 of the City Code for subdivisions. Just a bit of background, the site is at the southern corner of Crane Street and Fowler Street and is surrounded by other single-family residential homes. Also, while not associated with this lot line adjustment itself, it's worth noting that the house and the accessory barn structures on the subject property are designated under the city's Historic and Cultural Conservation Ordinance as historic structures. Currently, the owners intend to move the barn structure within the properties from the lot 2B1 to the new lot new lot 2A1, which is the subject of a separate building permit process and review by the Historic Architectural Review Board. As I mentioned before, both lots already meet the lot size requirements for an R1A district, and they will continue to do so. Staff reviewed the first submission in early June and provided minimal comments just in relation to the tree survey. They just wanted some more information on the tree survey, the existing sanitary sewer lines, and the proposed driveway location. The applicant responded to those comments via multiple emails to planning and public works staff near the end of July. The comments were clarified, and the comments were soon taken away by staff. On line number 82 of the staff report, we just have a table showing the existing and proposed square footage calculations between the two lots. As you can see, they both meet the requirement for the lot square footage. Adjacent property owner notices were sent out and yard signs were posted at the property on August 3rd, 2023. Staff has not received any comment as of tonight's public hearing on this subject. That's it for my staff report. I'm here if you have any questions. We also have a representative of the owner, Mr. Rick Watkins, is here. And that's all from me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Before we take comments and questions from the commissioners, I'll open the matter up to the public. Is there anyone who would like to address this issue? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. So at this point, we can open it up to the commissioners for any questions or comments that you might have. Any questions, comments? Mr. Krasner?
Just a quick question. And actually, this, I'll say, I know we had discussions, I forget when that was, where we talked about our lot line adjustments and how we're going to handle them. And I think I know I was the one who talked about wanting to see it. And this is an example of one where I'm still glad we're seeing it, but it obviously this is one where I think it's a little more straightforward. But I still think it's good to have the process. I mean, we're a small enough jurisdiction that we can afford to take the time to look at even relatively small proposals like this. So anyhow, with that said, though, just to confirm for the record, it's going to be, they're conforming today. You have two conforming buildable lots today. You'll have two conforming buildable lots afterwards. But actually, you're improving, I think, the layout, right? Because right now it's irregular. And I don't know what the history of that lot is and how long it's had that strange jog in it. I don't know if the applicant knows, the history of the subdivision, and I know that's an older property. But obviously, this proposal is sort of fixing that. I don't know if staff knows the history behind how it was carved out the way it is today. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the title record would, perhaps show that. But in any event, it certainly is improving the layout, which is kind of the goal of the subdivision ordinance anyway. And even if it's a lot line adjustment is to improve it. And it's actually refreshing to see a change that is, making it a better lot. We often see people trying to squeeze in, extra lots that aren't so great. So anyhow, but overall, yeah, this one seems like an improvement and to the current condition, which is what we want to see.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Someone like to make a motion?
Or just one quick question. I'm sorry if I missed it in your staff report. Did you say something about correspondence about the barn being relocated? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, so there's a, on the lot, Jack, if you can bring up attachment 3, I think would be the best one here. But the lot, I believe it's 2B1, so the one where the lot is kind of being squared off. There is a historic barn located on that property. The applicant has been working with HARB on several occasions. They initially wanted to raise the barn, but they cannot do that without recommendation from the HARB, which declined that application. So they've been working with HARB as far as a means of moving the barn. The idea at this point would be to move it to Lot A1, which there is the existing historic structure there now, the home.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a letter that was in the HARB, the last materials for the meeting, talking about the condition of the structure. It's in really bad shape, according to the engineer that looked at it, but that's all right. I don't think it really affects the decision here tonight. I think it is pretty straightforward. Just curious about that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, can we get a motion?
I could do it. Okay, so this is in subdivision application 2023-0396 for a lot line adjustment between two existing lots at 1011 Fowler Street on an application by Karen K. Morrison, trustee, as owner and applicant. Whereas the proposed subdivision meets all applicable requirements of the city subdivision and zoning ordinances as they are currently applied and practiced. And the proposed subdivision is generally consistent with the comprehensive plan. Therefore, I move that the Planning Commission grant preliminary and final plat approval of the subdivision plats dated May 16th, 2023, and revised through August 9th, 2023, of 1011 Fowler Street into proposed new lots 2B1 and 2A1.
Is there a second?
A second?
Ms. Comat on the second. Mr. Trainer?
Mr. Krasner,
Yes?
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Ms. Comat,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, so now we can move on to the adoption of our closed session.
Right, so we're going to go into closed session, and so I'll make the motion. I'll move that the Planning Commission recess into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A8 for consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. In this case, those matters are the updates to the transitional T-zones.
Is there a second?
A second?
Ms. Comat on the second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Seeing none, the item is passed, and we will move into closed session for, I'm going to estimate 20 minutes roughly or so, but we will move to another room and come back here to resume our discussion.
all portions of a building above 40 feet in height when adjoining or across the street from a residential district, or when facing a B district with an approved special exception for multifamily use. Going to setbacks, the Planning Commission recommended a 20-foot setback in the front by right with a potential reduction to 15 feet in the front through the SUP, and the same is in the council's recommendation of a 20-foot by right front setback, reducible to 15 feet through the SUP. For rear setbacks, the Planning Commission recommended 20 feet in the rear with a SUP reduction to 10 feet. In the council's referral, the rear setback is 15 feet with no possibility to reduce that through the SUP. Side yard setbacks were set at 10 feet in the Planning Commission's recommendation, and the council included that as well at 10 feet. For impervious surfaces, there was the Planning Commission recommended that an 80% maximum be put on T1 districts for impervious surfaces, and the City Council included that in their referral as well. For building coverage, the Planning Commission recommended 60% by right and 70% allowed through the SUP, and the Council has the same. For tree canopy, the Planning Commission recommended a minimum of 15%. In the Council's recommendation, this is changed to a reference to a state code section 15.2-961, which ties tree canopy minimums to the density that a project is built at, recognizing that the density has increased in this proposal, but that it could still be built at the same density that the Planning Commission last considered this at. So under this state code, whatever a redevelopment is built at would have to conform to the tree canopy requirements at the state level. On line 51, environment and districts, the Planning Commission recommended for historic preservation the maintenance of the Historic and Cultural Conservation District. This is a citywide conservation district, as well as adding SUP consideration to incorporate and maintain historic structures in the city. In the council's referral, the 4 historic properties are included here, and staff's recommendations on historic preservation efforts are listed in here, including what the Planning Commission recommended, which was upholding the HCC, but also some recommendations such as rezoning the properties with historic structures on them from T1 to T2, or purchasing the development rights, or seeking a protective covenant for the property from its owner, or lastly, seeking an agreement with the property owners that would allow the city a right of first refusal should the property be marketed for sale. On parking, the Planning Commission required setting off-street parking minimums at 1 space per home, and that no off-street parking would be allowed within the front setback. The Planning Commission also recommended including electric vehicle charging language. In the council's recommendation referral, 1 space per dwelling unit has been included. Also a note that commercial uses would vary depending on their size and uses, and that no off-street parking is allowed within the front setback. Certain environmental and conservation language, particularly around EV parking and solar, are included in the SUP consideration criteria. So on the districts box, the Planning Commission recommended combining T1 and T2 into a single T-zone, as well as removing residential uses via the T-zone for properties along North Washington, north of Great Falls Street, and that all commercial uses fronting Park Avenue would be conditional. In the City Council's recommendation, the consolidation of T1 and T2 was struck in that the focus of the proposal is now solely on the T1 districts. Under project reviews, line 53, for 1 to 4 family buildings, the Planning Commission recommended, similar to tying into previous recommendations, that 1 to 2 family homes, new 1 to 2 family homes would not be allowed, and that a grading plan review would be required for 3 and 4 family homes only, which were recommended to be by right, and that for townhouses and multifamily developments, that those Those proposals would follow the SUP and then the site plan procedure, and that for commercial uses, that a site plan would be recommended. A site plan procedure would be required for commercial uses, except those on Park Avenue that would exceed, except those on Park Avenue which would require the SUP. In council's recommendation, a grading plan would be required for sites up to 9,000 square feet, and under the current proposed density requirements, this would yield between 2 and 8 units. And a site plan would be required for sites greater than 9,000 square feet. Also included in the referral is an SUP for height and setback and building coverage reductions and/or ADU bonus density greater than the 20% that would be available to redevelopers at by right. Site plan. All right, moving to commercial. I touched on this a moment ago, but under the council's referral for a commercial, so this would follow the site plan procedure, and then on Park Avenue, an SUP would be required for commercial uses greater than 4,000 square feet, or for those seeking setback or height restriction relief. And on timing, we're here tonight, August 16th, on line 79 for your first work session at the latest proposal. City Council will hold an additional work session on September 5th. And the very next night, the Planning Commission will hold its public hearing on September 6th. And right now, City Council is scheduled to make its final consideration on the proposal on September 11th. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll hand it back to you, and happy to answer any questions.
If I could just interject one thing on the timing section, I know some of those dates seem like they get a little close together. The timing section does lay out, beginning on line 56, June 2021 is when council first took this up as a work session. They spent a full 11 months considering the proposal before making their first reading in May of 22. You all as a group then considered it for 7 months before making your recommendations back to council in February of 2023. Council then, in consideration of your recommendations as well as other public comment they were receiving, took another 6 months to deliberate before making a new first reading on August. And so a lot of this, I think what you're seeing is sort of a culmination of a significant conversation that's played out over 2+ years. And attached in your staff report, there is a narrative that we titled sort of how this proposal got here, and it sort of lays through some of the big steps that were taken at those meetings and at those public hearings over the last 2+ years.
Okay. Our turn?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right, I think our goal tonight is to, first of all, ask any clarifying questions that we have, just to make sure that we understand the council's new first reading, and to the degree that we can, provide some input to planning staff that might be used in development of a proposed recommendation for our next meeting. So with that, I can open it up to anyone who would like to pursue questions or make comments. Commissioner Comont, you look like you're ready to jump in.
I can go first. So the current recommendation is for 14 to 34 units by right. I'm just curious if you can tell me how you arrived at the 34 cutoff?
Right. So 34 units per acre. Originally, I think we kind of walked backwards here. So the total you can get to is 40 units per acre by right through the density bonus. And we kind of walked backwards to what 20% might take to get there. And so we then arrived at 34 units per acre. I think that way.
And the reason for the 34 and the 40, one of the big premises of this project all along has been trying to get at, motivate at, allow for a wider variety in housing types, not only in price but also in size. And so related to the units per acre is also the unit sizes of the 1,500 square feet or the 1,800 square feet. And so a lot of what came up after you all made your recommendations back to council was, well, what if someone wanted to build what's called a 2-over-2 unit? Instead of a traditional townhouse that's 3 or 4 stories tall, what if they only wanted to build a 2-floor unit? Could they do that? And when you look at an acre of land and unit sizes of about 1,500 square feet, it's that 34 units, 40 units per acre that allows for that kind of housing form. And so it still has to fit within the development envelope that's proposed. The building heights, the setbacks, the lot coverages, and all those things fit. And that combination of 1,500 or 1,800 square foot units with either 34 or 40 units per acre is what fits within that development envelope. So it's a suite of measures that all arrive at that sort of variety of housing prices and variety of housing forms.
Okay, that's helpful. And then I guess maybe related to that, I have a question. So the language in the code update, line 473, says you can achieve a maximum density of 34 units per acre and up to 40, exclusive of those units achieved through the bonus density. So can you talk me through that? I just don't quite, I'm not sure I completely understand what it means. Are we talking about 40 units total or more than 40 units?
So it's what we're trying to do is port over the language that's so. This is language that's specifically enabled by state code, and in Virginia, when you're enabled to use the code, then that's the vehicle you have to use. And so there's a prescribed density bonus, and that density bonus is based on your maximum allowable units per acre. And so in this case, the maximum allowable units per acre is 34. And so we're just making sure it's clear in the code that if someone accesses the density bonus, that it's a percentage of that 34 units per acre that have to
So
be
they get an
affordable.
extra 6 units or
Correct.
20% based on that schedule that
Yeah.
is referenced as well?
Correct. And then we've been talking about it sort of internally as sort of 3 avenues. There's by right, which is up to 34 units to the acre. There's what we're calling by right plus. If you provide the 10% of the units is affordable, you can get up to 40 units per acre by right. And then there's the SUP option where you could get up to 60 units per acre subject to council review and approval. But the percentage of required affordable units would be increasing as you go up from 40 units to 60 units. And there is a ladder for that.
Okay, so does that ladder also apply to the by right plus? That sort of calculation is the same, that ratio of units to bonus increased density?
It's all the same. The ratios are all the same. That bump from 34 to 40 is the only bump available, but it is the same ratio.
So I guess I'm just trying to figure out like why anybody would want to access those extra 6 units, right? I wonder if 34 is too high. So I guess I'm thinking that you see them more as interested in accessing the higher average unit size. Is that correct?
Yeah, so both things come in combination, and I think what's interesting about the state code is that it's a ladder that's applicable statewide, and it may make more sense in some jurisdictions in the Commonwealth than in others, or it may make sense at some scales of development versus others. And so the proposal here to mix in the average unit size is a way to try and adjust the sort of falls church specific economics so that yes, the idea is that by increasing the square footage, there's enough value in the project to cover the costs of those ADUs.
Of those units. And then the units, I think I read in somewhere that they were administered under Section 7 or something like that. I was wondering how they would just be dealt with as any units. It could be cash in lieu or those affordable units I'm referring to. How does that work in these smaller projects?
Yep. Article 7 is the existing city code for handling ADUs, and so we would use those same provisions for these units. So the idea is to get a uniform way of handling ADUs. There is a cash in lieu provision that we're sort of reviewing in between first and second reading to make sure it sort of stands up to current standards. I think last time Article 7 was reviewed was more than a few years ago, so we just want to make sure that it's sort of consistent with where state code is now.
Okay. I also wanted to ask about the step backs. So I know we recommended step backs on all street frontages, and so I think it's now only step backs. I'm sorry, I'm not referring to the setback, but the step back that kicks in at 40 feet of height. But now I think it's only either adjacent to or facing residential districts, and I'm wondering, I support that, but I'm wondering if we also want to, and this is maybe a question for my fellow commissioners, but if we also want to recommend that be applied to any frontage on Park Avenue as well. If the sort of character of Park Avenue that we want to maintain is one that, would have a 40-foot height at the street.
Well, I'm interpreting that all the T-zone lots on Park Avenue, since they face residential units, that they would all have to have step backs. Is that
That's
correct interpretation?
That's correct.
So there's no T-zone, any that, I thought there was at least one property.
We can review, but most do.
I know most of them do.
Front, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Can you tell me about the change for the 15-foot setback for the rear? Was that just a council request?
Sure. So I think, as kind of the discussion we just had, accessing the 80 density bump is important, and it kind of ties into that additional average square footage bump as well. With the reduction in the proposed maximum average unit size to, starting at 1,500 square feet, that's recognizing that, it's trying to keep the units smaller, recognizing that there's a premium to live in the city. It's expensive, and smaller units that fit in, a sale price of under $1 million generally has to be smaller. So the thinking was to try to drive down some of that, the starting and maximum average unit size, and you can get bigger with some concessions to the city, such as affordable housing.
Okay. And the reintroduction of single-family homes as allowed, so are you envisioning some sort of like tiny cottage homes?
Right.
Potentially?
That was the thinking when we introduced density parameters. Makes it impossible to build just one single-family home. So under the current proposal, you could build you could build a medley of things, a duplex, a single-family home, townhouses, any residential form essentially that fits within the density parameters of the units per acre and fits within the maximum average unit size, the height restriction setback.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to note for my fellow commissioners, I think I believe that this average price per square foot of some recent sales in the city of Falls Church is about $450 per square foot. So with a max average unit size of 1,500 square feet, that would equate to a $675,000 average cost, potentially. I think there's probably a premium for living on Park Avenue, and new construction is more expensive, but maybe a ballpark figure to keep in mind. Does that jibe with what staff is seeing?
We've been trying to look for comparable projects that are nearby, new construction, similar size, not inside the city but proximate to it. And it's likely that those sales prices per square foot will probably be higher in the city, especially for new construction. But underpinning all of this has been that idea of sort of getting to that variety of housing styles. And so what we're looking for is how can we guide landowners and developers to sort of do the things the community is looking for in terms of more moderate priced housing than what's otherwise available with single-family teardowns, and maybe a variety of housing styles where people are looking for less than several thousand square feet of home. So that's what's driving the considerations.
Okay, thanks. That's it for me from now.
Okay. Mr. Fuentes, did you?
Thank you. Those great comments. I think the council referral is a lot cleaner in a lot of ways than what we recommended before. I think it adheres to a lot of what we included in our recommendations. It cleans up, I think, a bunch of things, which is really helpful. I'm glad we had the conversation around the minimum and maximum. Lot size is 1,500 square feet. Seems really large to me. I'd like to see the ADUs be the ones in those larger units up to 1,800, but I know that may be a bridge too far. I'm not concerned, but curious about the minimum, the 700 square foot minimum for the units. Is there a reason that we wanted to restrict or to restrict it from being smaller?
There
Especially
is.
in lights we're just talking about.
When we ended up with this structure of sort of the units per acre, and really that units per acre structure was important for using the state code allowances related to ADUs, because those ADU bumps are all based on sort of units per acre, and so we needed a units per acre framework. What we were trying to protect against was sort of this concern that someone may get to their average unit size by making very, very small units, right on the order of 200, 300 square feet. And what we were concerned about is sort of you're arriving at affordability by providing overly small units, and then you end up with a bunch of luxury units, which wasn't the intent. And so the idea behind providing that floor of 700 is that it's still possible to fit. It's small, but it could be a family-sized unit. Certainly there are examples of two-bedroom condos that are in that 700 square foot range.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think there's lots of, especially in hot housing markets where we've seen a lot smaller units and that are affordable for some folks who, just because of the size of the unit. So I have to think about that one for a little bit.
The other angle is that because of the size of the projects, we are expecting them that it's not legislate. You can't legislate ownership versus rental, but we do expect most of these would be ownership. And I don't know that there's been that much of a test of the condo market at so small a unit. So I think also some of it is 700 square feet might still be something people are willing to invest money in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Isn't the West Falls project going to have some small units?
It might. It's more proximate to the metro. It's also in a larger building, and so it might provide some more flexibility there.
I thought that the 34 units per acre seems about right. Again, just looking around, looking at some other examples, that does seem to be about the density you need for the kind of activity we're looking for. 14 is good as a minimum. It feels too low to me, but I think that's generally in the right ballpark. The one question I had, I just wasn't clear, and just if you can go through one more time, what is the new change with the historic properties? I mean, there's 4 that are listed here. Are these the only 4, and so they're just being called out as special?
Only 4
with
in
the idea that we
T1.
could do something with them later.
Yeah, those are the only 4 properties in the T1 district. And, staff's included several recommendations about, what can be done to add some protections to those properties.
But council would have to adopt those, right?
Right, I think
Yeah.
we'd be looking for some direction on which one to move on or other ideas.
So if we wanted to, we could suggest one of the options over another. Yeah.
Sure.
The thought occurred to me, if we did, let's say, have an interest in utilizing, changing the properties that have historic buildings on them to T2, that would have to be done first. I mean, if you went ahead and adopted the T-zone changes and then expect to wait later on down the line, you could lose those parcels with historic properties on it. So that's, if you have any thoughts on how to sequence that.
So the HCC provisions would still be in effect, and assuming the HARB is going to make a negative recommendation on tearing down a worthwhile structure, there'd still be a minimum 1-year waiting period where the property has to be on the open market.
So there'd be time for council to go ahead and rezone the parcels with historic properties on it to T2?
There are some questions about once you have a paid application in, about changing the rules once the application is in, but the property would be on the market, so it would be an option for any buyer that wanted to preserve it, including the city, could put in a valid offer to preserve the property.
Maybe
Or
something to
it-
think about a little bit more.
Right,
See if
or it
there's
would give the
something
city
we
an
could do
option
to save those
negotiate
properties.
on some sort of preservation of the property. But so there is a year-long period where someone would have to hold the property and leave it on the market at a fair market value.
Yeah.
That's it for now.
That's it? Okay. Did you want to go next, Brent?
Sure, yeah, I'll go. And, I mean, on the ADUs, I think my colleagues have made some good comments, and I know Commissioner Hyra, I know we will hear from him on that. And I think that, I have some concern about whether or not we've incentivized enough. I I'm sure we'll hear from Commissioner Hyra that, on that matter. So maybe I'll let him, comment on that. But I'm happy to see some of the changes, at least moving in the direction. I mean, from a big picture perspective, we've all been, wrestling with this for, more months, I think, than we want to admit at this point in time. And I think, at least I can say I do see some positive change, and council certainly deserves credit. They've been wrestling with it too. And, I think overall what they've put out this time around is certainly moving in the right direction by and large. I mean, there are still concerns that I have. I mean, I'm concerned about that the cutoff for sort of the grading plan only, was kind of increased up to 8 units. I think, like I've said at other times, we're a small enough city that we have the bandwidth to be able to drill down on and really vet these things. And so, the cutoff of 4 units for grading plan only, I thought was better. Commissioner Stevens just mentioned the historic properties. I mean, I agree that we had a public comment on that too, that stronger protection for that. I agreed with Commissioner Teets at the time, and we haven't forgotten about that. It is a very valid issue, and the issue about the T2, and using that as a tool to help further protect those properties. Sometimes when they're put out on the open market, I think can be too late. So I kind of agree with that comment. I like the step back requirements. I think that I agree. I think the way they're worded, practically speaking, they are adjacent. So I think it works. The by right 4 stories for townhouses. I know we'll hear from the public on that. That it especially on Park, that it may be too tall, but I guess above 40 they have to step back, right?
Right.
So that helps. And of course, we do have the 20-foot front yard, which I'm okay with. The 15-foot rear yard adjacent to our districts might be a little too small. But, again, we could almost look at each lot by lot. I mean, it may work, but I still have a concern with that. I mean, the other comment, which I think Commissioner Comont discussed, again, was just related to the way the ordinance has been in draft form, is dealing with Planning Commission review. With respect to special use permits, I think it just needs to be cleaned up. As was discussed, it's just confusing now, the way it's worded as far as council's responsibility versus how the review starts with us, and then so upon recommendation by the Planning Commission. So that, I think, needs to be fixed. Obviously we're carrying over the language for drive-through uses, and I think the same level of scrutiny we'd want to have applied here, at the Planning Commission for any of these special use permit uses in the T districts. I think at this point, that's all I have. Like I said, from a big picture perspective, I think we've made a lot of progress, I think, on this. I mean, I think from the outset, I also had concerns that I kind of wasn't sure what the, overall kind of goal here was, because it's a lot of changes on a relatively small number of lots. I mean, I would say the way it reads to me now is it's certainly looking to encourage residential. I mean, I think the commercial, I know that we got some public comment throughout the process about wanting, some more commercial uses. But I think, right now, my only concern still is that, it's kind of, going to drive, a lot of townhouse construction. And there was a concern about whether or not we'd want to have that on Washington. And I don't know if that's, really dealt with here. I don't know if that's what we want to see on Washington, and I don't know if that's really dealt with here. We may be inadvertently incentivizing that. I mean, the market in Northern Virginia really likes townhouses. And even though you would think, it almost seems counterintuitive, you'd think, well, multifamily is more units, and so developers want to do that, but the townhouse market is super strong, and it's a product that can be built relatively inexpensively. The margins on those are very attractive to developers. So we just need to be careful, as far as whether or not that's something that we want to have go up on Washington. and I don't know if I see that dealt with in here. We talked about it, and I don't remember when. I know we talked about it earlier in the process at previous meetings, but, some of the minimum unit size stuff, I mean, I appreciate staff's, discussion about how they arrived at some of that stuff. I think it is, it's difficult, traditionally, when you look at like that's an aspect of zoning ordinances that, in the old days, minimum unit sizes were a way to not have affordable units by putting in, minimums, and typically you wouldn't even have a maximum. I mean, so all that is to say, it's difficult. A lot of those are market driven, and it can be difficult if we're overly prescriptive, on either the low or the high end. And so certainly there is a precedent for doing that, obviously on the high end, to try to encourage affordability. And I agree with you. The market on its own would probably want to build much bigger because square footage equals, dollars. And so I get that on the high end. The minimum size is interesting. I don't think I've seen as much of that out there, as far as a minimum limit. I don't know. I got something I would be curious about Commissioner Hyra having any comments on that, just because I'm not as familiar with it, but I'm sure he is whether or not that's, prudent or not. I think that's all I had. Also, process-wise, I know the time frame is relatively abbreviated, I mean, certainly overall, this has been a very long process, but, we're seeing it now again in its new, version, and we're looking to then, based on the current schedule, to adopt it, or at least make a recommendation. No, we're not adopting it, but to make a recommendation back to council on September 6th, which is at our next meeting. 3 of our commissioners aren't even here tonight. I know some of them did provide some feedback, in written comments, but I'm just concerned. I mean, we can talk about that as a group, but I'm concerned that perhaps I'm not looking to extend this any longer. Trust me, I am not. But given all the changes, and some of the details and other things that we need to maybe go through as far as tweaking the draft text, we should talk about whether or not another, maybe the second meeting in September might be better than the first. Just a thought. If we need more time and for staff to continue to vet things with the city attorney and make some edits to the text. So just a thought, but that's what I got.
Okay. I don't have a lot of items, but Jack, I was just wondering, is it possible to put up that photograph that you added to the walking tour that has the 2/2? Yeah. So I think what we have there, the darker colored brick looks like a 3-story unit, kind of a traditional townhouse. And then next to it, in the white clapboard, that looks to me like a 4-story unit, basically, which could be a 2/2 type of unit. And so am I correct that the 45 feet that council now has in the height is kind of aimed at trying to encourage that type of a building?
2/2. That's correct.
Yeah, so, I mean, basically, you could have the top two, starting out with the lower 2 units, typically those units would have the parking for both the higher unit and the lower unit carved out of the space for that lower unit. So it's going to be a smaller unit, which presumably would be more attractive to a lower income set of individuals. And then the upper floors, since they wouldn't have that parking taken away from them, that could be a larger unit and be a somewhat more premium unit. So that's one thing that strikes me as attractive and at least helps me wrap my mind around the 45 feet, because we were at 35 feet before, and we're now at 45 feet. But I think it helps to see what could happen, what we could get with that additional by right height. I'm a little concerned that on Park Avenue, do we really want to go to 50 feet with an SUP, or should we just stop at 45 feet, again, just for Park Avenue? That's something I'm wrestling with, and I'm certainly open to thoughts from the other commissioners on that. The other is the notion of having up to 60 units on Park Avenue just strikes me viscerally as too big. So again, I'm open to my fellow commissioners, is that those two areas, maybe the height stopping at 45 feet and the units stopping, I'll pick a number, 50 units rather than 60, trying to make it more acceptable for Park Avenue, because we're really trying to find the balance here between coming up with some changes that encourage development, that after all was the genesis of this whole effort, is how do we take areas that have been stagnant and change the code so as to encourage development, yet not get so far that it gets out of sync with the area that it's at. So, those two changes are just kind of thoughts that I'm, can't say I'm wedded to, but I'm still thinking about it. And I'm open to any comments that the rest of you might have on that. I don't think I had anything dramatic else to ask. I was pleased that council pretty much stayed with the, let's call it the external parameters that we came up with in our February recommendation, that pretty much most of the changes that they made dealt with the inside of the units, and that really is aimed at the heart of diverse housing, which I think has really become the primary goal for the changes that we're making here. And yes, it's not going to affect very much, and it certainly is not going to do anything for affordable housing. Commissioner Hyra, we agree with you. But it is something that we can do in a very limited area in the city to start the process of relooking at our codes to make changes for the way that housing, the problems that we have with housing that exists today. So I guess that's kind of where I come out at the moment. Any other thoughts or suggestions or?
Just on your comment, I would have more of a problem, I think, with the height and the intensity upward bounds on Park if it wasn't the SUP. If it was by right, I would have more of a problem with
I
it.
see.
So the SUP gives me
The
comfort.
backstop is the SUP, yeah.
That's my feeling, too,
Okay.
on that
All
same
right.
question.
Yeah, I kind of agree, and also I think it may be self-limited in the sense of, in order to actually achieve that on Park, it would be quite difficult. You'd have to, to assemble the land. I don't know if it would even be doable with what's left, that's like available to ever achieve that. But the SUP does provide the backstop to look at it. So, I mean, I agree. It sounds kind of
Big.
large, and I'm sure.
Yeah.
I understand the community concern when, about that number. I mean, we could cap it at something smaller, but, I think it may be self-limited given what we're talking about as far as, the lots that would actually be available in the T on Park. I
Okay.
don't know if you could ever actually
Well,
achieve
I
that.
appreciate the feedback. I'm still going over in my own mind, too, a lot of the public comments that we've gotten. Probably need a little bit more time to fully absorb those. But on the whole, I think this is headed in the right direction. And so don't know if Commissioner Krasner may be right that trying to achieve our recommendation on the 6th may be challenging. I'm sure we're willing to give it the college try, but we don't want to have haste, result in a product that we don't feel confident in. So I think we'll do our best to try to achieve a recommendation on the 6th, but may not happen.
Well, I mean, just to that point, if I could just chime in, I mean, do we want to maybe recommend that we adjust our schedule for that? I mean, right now it's, because otherwise staff's going to have to advertise a public hearing on September 6th. The deadline for that must be coming up. Mr. Stoddard, is that, right, the deadline to advertise? I imagine would be coming up pretty
So
soon.
the deadline was set by council as part of the referral out. They did set their second hearing date to be September 11th. And so that September 6th date was selected to accommodate that schedule.
I mean, the other option is to have the hearing on the 6th and then, defer, not make a decision on the 6th and defer it to our, to our next meeting. But I mean, I just don't know if we're going to be there. I mean, I guess, it puts a lot of, there were a lot of comments, staff that, came out and other comments that were received. And it seems like a heavy lift for staff to get that out, a week in advance. That really gives you guys very little time. And then the public relatively a small amount of time to review it. So I don't know. I don't know, how hard it is. Again, we're not looking to like upset the apple cart with council on, on these schedules, but, it maybe, I don't know what's involved in changing that, but we've done it before, right? So, I don't know what everyone else thinks about it.
I think we'll just have to see how it goes on the 6th.
Okay, we can do it that way too. I just don't like that. I guess, the only thing I don't like is that I don't like the perception, and I don't think it's fair to say anything's been rushed, but I don't, I would hate to hear from the public that, if things come out relatively, shortly before the 6th, that they didn't have enough time to review any changes. And I don't know. I'd rather just be able to have an adequate amount of time for everyone to look at things and not feel like things are compressed. This time, to me, it feels a little compressed to try to get to a public hearing. But maybe staff can do it. Otherwise, we just, I don't know if that makes it harder for staff to then, if we defer decision on September 6th, because we're not ready. Does that make it more difficult to reschedule it? Or, does that, because we're still upsetting the September 11th council date at that point if we don't act on the 6th, right?
I guess I'll say that sort of staff's expectation is that we are sort of on the hook for preparing sort of two things in advance of your sort of the proposed public hearing date. One is, and we flagged this in our staff report, council made 2 adjustments at the dais. We'll get those reflected in the code that's in front of you, so that's included in your packet. And then the other thing that we'll include, or we expect to have ready for you, is your proposed motion. Right, because same as last time, Planning Commission isn't sort of writing or rewriting the code. Here, really, your action back to council is, are there adjustments that need to be made in the code language? So that, sort of the code is what the council referred out, and then sort of what's being adjusted between now and your public hearing is the motion of your recommendation, the recommendations you want to make back.
That is true. That's true. That's true. It just, again, then it just puts, I don't know, it winds up being a very long-winded recommendation back with a lot of concerns and things we don't like and things that need to be fixed. And I don't know. I know staff in the past has, done some conceptual kind of edits or changes between the work session and the hearing, because otherwise, what's the point of the work session if you're just going to come back in 2 weeks and we have the same thing we're looking at tonight? But I don't know. Like I said, that's just my opinion. I'm just one voice, but it seems like September 6th for us to vote and feel good about it. I don't know how doable that is, but maybe I'll be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, just looking at the table that's in front of you, there are some things that are largely the same as what were in your recommendations back to council several months ago. And then the items where there are differences, that's really what's been the subject of those 7 public meetings between sort of your recommendation back to council and tonight. And so those things that are different have been adjusting sort of iteratively over each of those meetings, whether it's the urban design features of the setbacks or the heights or the units per acre to try and drive at that sort of affordability angle. And so those things are different, and they've been a little bit different with each meeting, but that's because they're sort of responding to and incorporating the feedback received. So the things that are different, those have been changing iteratively over those 7 meetings. And then like I said, there are several items that are the same as you all saw them and recommended to council.
Okay. I was just looking at my notes here. I noticed I didn't see, or I should start out by saying, I did see in the environmental stewardship provision a reference to the EV ready, but I didn't see the solar ready language. So maybe I just missed it, but in case I didn't, if you could have a look at that and just make sure that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
EVs where they're parked.
Yeah.
I didn't try.
I mean, you could kind of imply it with reduced greenhouse gas emissions, but it doesn't specifically say, giving preference to projects that are solar ready. And I think that's what the ESC intended.
Right, I think we moved some of those things to the SUP consideration under, it's in, of the code, it's section 48-867. It's in the, let's see, the city council staff report, it's line 598, which I think is attachment 1A. And we have here that the SUP consideration language is promotes environmental stewardship, including but not limited to provision of electric vehicle charging spaces, reduced energy use, and/or reduced greenhouse gas emissions.
And I think what you're saying, Chair, is you just want solar ready to be one of those items listed.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that was what was in the staff report, so it'd be nice to have the code match that. Again, just a editing point. Okay, final call from commissioners before we close this item out?
So does staff have a list of the recommendations for the proposed motion for our next meeting? Have you been capturing the items?
Yeah, some
that
of them
we've
were
discussed
questions
so
for the
far?
group. It may be helpful if you want me to sort of run through my
Yeah.
notes. So maybe what I'll do is I'll sort of walk through them in sort of the order that I heard them, and I'll sort of clarify whether there was direction or a question. Sorry, I'll move the mic closer. Is that better? Okay. So one question was, is that sort of the jump from 34 units to the 40 units per acre enough to motivate the ADUs? And then there was the conversation of the square footage. So it wasn't, at the end of that, that's actually the first one, it wasn't clear to me if the commission wanted to make a recommendation on that or whether that had resolved.
I think it's resolved.
Okay.
Just a question then?
Just a question.
Yeah.
There was a question about, on heights and setbacks, and that came up in a couple different ways, about, I think it was largely about sort of the setback on Park Avenue, but then it came up that all of the properties on the north side of Park Avenue were in our district, so that step back would apply. But there was a related question about whether Park Avenue should allow for a potential increase in height to 50 feet, and I think that was a question sort of thrown out to the group, but maybe unanswered.
I raised it as a concern, but my colleagues, I think, have persuaded me that we can stay with it the
Through
way
the
you
SUP
proposed.
process. Okay. There was a question from two folks about the minimum unit sizes and the 700 square feet, and concern about sort of past practice was to use unit size minimums as an exclusionary zoning technique. And so I think there was some conversation about whether that was the right tool to use to actually sort of try and promote affordability for a variety of housing types. So, so maybe direction from the group on that one?
Is it possible to set a unit size maximum instead of a minimum? Or advisable?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the average unit max.
Yeah, so what's restricted now is the average unit size and then the minimum unit size. And so the idea is that the average unit size is designed to allow for flexibility so that people can provide a variety of housing types even within the same project, but not sort of forfeit any value by providing some smaller units and some larger units.
I suppose if you set the maximum unit size, you could still sort of maybe abuse the average by having a bunch of really big units and a bunch of tiny 200, 300, which maybe are needed, but
You could probably flip it around mechanically. You could probably flip it around and still specify the average and then the maximum instead of the average and the minimum.
that's my question. Yeah.
I'm a little concerned that that's a different formulation from what we considered. And so I would, talking about running things by the city attorney, that does seem like it'd be maybe a different way of structuring it. If it could have the same result, maybe that wouldn't be an issue, but I would want to think about that internally sort of
Okay.
before bringing it out. And also thinking about the mechanic, just because we hadn't really run through the ramifications of that. But we can certainly think about it and let you know, what we come up with between now and 2 weeks from now. There was a concern, and I think this was across several members, concerns about historic protections, and so that may be something that maybe what I heard is sort of an interest in the commission to move quickly on maybe a rezoning of the land.
Well,
It seems
it's
like-
kind of hard to say, because it seems like council would take the initiative on that. I mean, we could recommend that maybe that's a good way, out of the various options that are provided, to provide protection for those historic properties. But it's important to get the sequencing right if it's to be effective.
So just a note that you all are empowered to initiate a rezoning process, that it can be either on the council's motion or your motion, as well as an applicant. As a group, you all can make that recommendation, council, to initiate a rezoning.
Okay? That may be something you could consider drafting some language for.
I think you could just embed it within your recommendation.
Right.
Let's see, there was a question about whether 14 units to the acre was maybe too low. We're not really expecting anyone to develop at the minimum number of units per acre, and that's not to say people won't. There's a reason we picked 14, and I'll walk through that. So it was right that given that the average unit size is sort of a controlling thing on value, if you had the ability to put on more units, you would put on more units to get more value out of it. The reason for the 15 was that there are some T-zone parcels that are relatively small, and so they may have a challenge because of site plan requirements or grading plan requirements developing the land. And so that 14 units per acre still ensures that even at a 6,000 square foot lot, you still get at least a duplex versus a single family house. So that 14 was specifically geared at making sure that even a 6,000 square foot lot still provides a duplex. Let's see. There was a question. There was a question about the limit for grading plan versus site plan, and whether that should kick in at sort of the 8 units or the 4 units.
9,000 square feet, is that something that?
Yeah, right now it's at 9,000 square feet.
Right.
But we
How
could-
does that compare? Is that unique to T-zones, or is that something that exists?
So right now, single-family homes, which can be up to, well, there's no limit on how big an R1A lot can be, but R1A has to be at least 11,000 square feet. So 11,000 square foot lots by code develop with grading plans, and sometimes they're larger. One of the lots tonight was a 20,000 square foot lot, which would be developed via grading plan. And so here, this really references back to the Planning Commission's recommendations that quadplexes ought to be treated like single-family houses, and so that would match the 4 units, and then we picked the 9,000 just because we were trying to be within that spirit of sort of small-scale residential development. 4 units, 8 units. It's relatively modest in size and impact, and so as staff, we recommended grading plan. Certainly, other numbers would make sense too.
Yeah. Well, I'm open to suggestions if you,
It just seemed like, right, and I remember that discussion about the
Yeah.
quads, and that's 4. So, but
Right.
am I reading it wrong? I mean, now we're recommending, the draft now says 8?
2 to 8.
Yeah, it's 9,000 square feet, so when you apply that sort of that range of 14 to 34.
It seemed like an 8-unit development is something that, I don't know, I mean, yeah, I can see both sides of the, I don't think that it's that much of an impediment to have someone come in, because a grading plan, we don't see a grading plan. It's completely administrative. I mean, I think once you get to an 8-unit building, I mean, I think that we would want to have some, I think there's a benefit to having a more of a public process on that.
if you wanted a lower number, I'd support it.
I was comfortable with the 4. I think, I don't know if we, I don't know, I can't remember when we discussed what, but the idea of having, someone being able to do a quad, on one of these lots without having to go through
Site plan.
Yeah, go through a more robust process. I was okay with that, but when you get more than that, you start getting, I feel like it should have to come in for a site plan. But that's just me.
Sure. I mean, I've got that in my notes. We'll bring that in your motion. We'll figure out the right square footage for that 4 units. Let's see. Clarify, yeah, so we've got an action to clarify the role of to make sure the code is clear and consistent on the roles of the PC, the BZA, the city council on review and processing of special use permit applications, as well as any sort of cross-referencing in code. Let's see. Let's see. Again, the concern about sort of the units per acre, but again, sort of that reference, units per acre above 40, but again, sort of it sounded like the group landed on sort of the special use permit as the sort of the right venue for that consideration, and it protects against sort of what are the concerns of the group. And then request to include a specific reference to solar ready as part of the SUP considerations under environmental.
Yeah.
And that concludes my notes.
Did you have any other items, Mr. Trainer?
No, I was just looking, and that's what I have too.
I think the only other thing we talked about was the reference to the state code on tree canopy coverage and how it talks about zoning, how properties are zoned, but that's not really sort of the way that, I think we were going to try to clean up something on our end to make it clear that we're not.
If somebody wants 19 units per acre, it's 15%.
It's 15%, yeah.
Yeah, we can clarify that language about, because you're right, sort of the zoning sort of spans that boundary, and so we can clarify, how we're
referencing
Yeah.
it. Yeah. I think that's all I had.
Okay, I think that brings us to a close there, and we're on to Planning Commissioners' reports. Does anybody have a report for this evening? Seeing none, I think we can go, Mr. Stoddard, to your report.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Planning Director's report for tonight. There are a couple items that are laid out in the memo in your packet, as well as the attachments associated with it. 2 quarterly reports I wanted to share with you, the Planning and Zoning quarterly report, as well as the Building Safety quarterly report. So both of these report out on activities of the 2 groups well, 3 groups, because planning and zoning is a double report. The activities of the groups over the last 3 months, noting sort of major investment in buildings across the city, plan reviews, plan development, things like the East End Small Area Plan, getting through a successful final motion, final action. As well as recent hirings and welcomings of new staff to the team. And for the Planning and Zoning quarterly report, we also chart out what's expected over the next quarter. So that's available for your review. Something else to update you on, the Quinn application. The council did refer the Quinn redevelopment proposal to boards and commissions as part of their August 7th, 2023 meeting. And I've included the link to the city's website with project information. The tentative schedule for Planning Commission review is to review the application to get you all have seen it previously, now you'll see a presentation on the revised proposal. At your September 6th meeting, and also boards and commissions would be invited to send 1 or 2 reps. That's consistent with our standard operating procedures for review of SEs. That ensures that all the boards and commissions are receiving the same information at the same time, and also it helps to sort of see issues across all the various interests in the boards and commissions. So all the boards and commissions have the benefit of hearing from each other their early reactions to the proposal. You all would then host your own work session on September 20th, and then the expectation would be that you all take a recommendation back to council, make your recommendation back to council on October 4th. Community benefits agreements, you all had asked at a previous...
Just if I could interrupt
I'm
real
sorry.
quick before you get to that one. I think in one of those earlier reports, I was glad that you pointed out that the City Hall is still not in compliance with its certificate of occupancy because of the lack of a bike shelter. So I appreciate you highlighting that, and hopefully that will get its due attention one of these days soon.
It does put us on a funny spot, but we are trying to track applications that have sort of longstanding issues with, COs or site plan compliance. And we are still working internally to try and get that bike parking delivered. Obviously, it's an important part of delivering on city policy. It's part of the approved site plan. It was part of the approval for the parking reduction. And so getting that bike parking in and available at City Hall is obviously important. I'm sorry, to pick up where I was, community benefits agreements, CBAs. At a previous Planning Commission meeting, you all had asked for some information on what those are, how they've been used, what's their applicability in different areas. And so we included, our senior planner, Emily Bazemore, has done some research and provided that to you in a memo along with some examples of CBAs.
Have any been negotiated in Virginia?
Are we enabled to do that?
Yeah, it's not clear that Virginia localities are enabled to make them legally binding or to make them a condition of a project approval. Generally, the American Planning Association finds that they're not generally a condition of project approval, but rather they are something outside of the approval process that is negotiated between a prospective developer and a community group. And what it assures is that the community group gets the benefits that they're looking for as part of the project, and then the community group agrees to support the project publicly.
I think the University of Chicago article made it pretty clear these are pretty complicated undertakings. It's not for the small entities.
They can be in the sense that sort of enforceability can be difficult because it's an agreement between private parties, and so those private parties have to survive the project to sort of enforce their sort of mutual obligations. The other thing that's awkward, I think speaking from a staff perspective here, right, as the local government official, it's awkward because it introduces another group into the entitlement process, where typically the council is looking for the interest of the community at large. And so it can be difficult when there's a potentially third, fourth, or fifth group at the table looking out for their own interests as well. And so is the community at whole being served, or is it a sort of a more specific group?
Okay.
So it's not to say that they haven't been put to good purpose. It's just a different way of thinking about the entitlement process and who's involved. And then I do want to step through the agenda look ahead. Sometimes I forget to do this, but then I always wish I had. It's on the back of your agenda. There we go. Here we go. I've got it in bigger text here. So a couple things coming up on your agenda, and then also trying to highlight things that are coming up on the council's agenda relevant to your work. So September 6th, as I mentioned, T-Zone's public hearing, as well as your review of the Quinn home stretch, and really that's a reintroduction to that project. Council scheduled to take final consideration of T-Zone September 11th. September 20th, you all would have a work session on both the Quinn Homestretch application as well as the Community Energy Action Plan, and that draft plan would be available for your review that night. September 26th, this would be a new item an item that has been ongoing at the staff level, but publicly will now be getting its kickoff, and that is a consideration to rezone some of the properties in the Tinner Hill neighborhood and along Liberty Avenue. And that's been a request by the community to get them zoned out of B3 and into one of the residential districts that's more fitting with the historic use of those historic and current use of those properties. So that would make its way, if it makes its way through council referral, it would come to you all for consideration. And then we'll also be starting a number of long-range planning efforts later in October. One is a public kickoff of the demographics update. This would be the city's first round of demographic projections done post-COVID. We have the support of the Stephen Fuller Institute from nearby George Mason University. They're obviously have expertise in demographics and also a lot of familiarity with the region. So it'll be great to have their support in this effort. So that'll kick off publicly on October 2nd. And with this project, they'll be providing not only population and employment projections for the city, they're also providing technical support to the school with school enrollment projections, which is something they've been looking for. And they'll also provide, to support the affordable housing efforts in the city, they'll provide projections for not just households and population, but household size and AMI levels of those households, which will also inform a lot of the thinking about the city's affordable living policy and how to pursue those goals. Bike plan update, as folks are probably aware, the city's operating under a 2016 bicycle master plan, and so we've already got a consultant on board to help us with that update. They'll be reviewing the map we have, the vision statement we have, but also taking a look at what are some specific routes pursuant to that Virginia Tech plan. What are the 3, 4, 5 routes the city should really try to implement, and what configuration over the next 3, 4 years. And then also trying to get, I had presented to you all previously in a director's report a short list of items that we're looking at administratively, from the administrative level of zoning text cleanups that make things either confusing, ambiguous, or difficult to administer, and bringing those through for cleanup. And obviously, it's a zoning text change, so it would go through you all as well as council. It's probably enough of a look ahead. I've gotten us into October, but obviously the rest of the dates they certainly become more tentative the further you go out. But that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. Any final words from our members? No? Okay, well, our meeting is concluded then.